Hey guys, and welcome back to the Kepler project. For anyone that might be just joining us in this episode, basically in the distant future we have discovered technology that allows us to traverse the galaxy very quickly, and a group of businessmen called the Omega Group have funded a mega city on Kepler 452b. This planet is very similar to Earth, but approximately 1.8 times the dimensions. The city they are building is an engineering marvel, one giant structure housing everything from entertainment to residential housing to industrial complexes, all connected via public transport with no roads whatsoever. The entire design of the city was not just for the comfort of its citizens, it was also to control them. Hundreds upon hundreds of cameras are scattered around the city, watching everybody's movements, all their purchases, all their likes, dislikes, all in the name of profit through targeted advertising. The first thing I want to do is set up these stations properly with functional lines that run between them. The airport that we built last episode is cranking. We have heaps of people coming in, so I need to make sure they have good access to the rest of the city that we've built so far. Then we're going to pretty much take off from where we left off last episode. I didn't quite get to detailing the station, so let's do it now. The first thing I want to do is add the same metal ground texture to the rest of this slightly raised area that we're working on. And then I'm thinking, well, we kind of need like a police headquarters, right? Because there's going to be a lot of police in the city, there's a lot of surveillance, all of it sort of needs to be worked on, as well as policing the rest of the city. We're going to need at least a main headquarters that we can work from around the rest of the city. And I figured right here by the airport would be a perfect place for it. Maybe they have their own access to public transport here because that's close as well. So that's what we're going to do. Now there is so many cool things in terms of sci-fi city skylines on the workshop that it's just, you couldn't shake a stick at it. It's ridiculous. So I really had to pick and choose which ones to get, but there's a couple of PO holographic shapes that we can manipulate the size and, more importantly, the texture of, which allows us to make some pretty cool custom holographic signs. And we've always been able to do this somewhat within reason, but when we reload the save, all of the holographic shapes that we've changed to PO would normally disappear, and that is still the case, but I've found a way to keep them, and we're going to go into that a bit later on. So I've used the text customization function here with procedural objects and added a maxed size blue sticker to this holographic, which makes it blue, and then added some writing which says serve and protect. And then I've used the modules function, which makes animation to anything that we've turned to procedural objects. And I've used that modules function to make this holographic sign look like it's spinning around and around. And eventually I put a little statue in the middle as well, so it looks like it's spinning around that. Now before we can take a breath, we're moving on to the next bit. This episode is stacked. So with this next bit here, I want to give this police station access to the rest of the city. So I want to make a ramp that goes down and over towards the public transport station, but I also want to make like their own sort of access to the public transport. So maybe they could put a call out 5 minutes before they're going to make a massive move or need the public transport, and they can have a clear run at anywhere in the city very quickly. And as an extension of the police station, I've also added this building here from Quad Rioters that's actually working. I haven't turned it to PO, and this is the other half of our police station where all of the air vehicles take off from. So because we've got some roads hidden, of course I've had to use the regular old police cars, but I've tried to do everything that I can with policies and whatnot to make these helicopters more effective. And as you can see there, I've downloaded a few different ones off the Steam Workshop, and it's so cool watching them buzz around the city. It is a nice little touch to our city, for sure. So next I want to add a couple of futuristic vehicles here, like tanks and stuff. And then I want to make some sort of access for the police straight onto our pod system. So maybe this isn't the first port of call when there's serious crime, but they can rely on this when they need to, and maybe there's some sort of message they can put out to the conductors within 5 minutes and have it all cleared of traffic. So I'm going to branch off the pod track here and make it look like it runs in and under the police station here through the retaining wall. And then I'm going to make this little raised platform with a few little black police sort of pod cars on it, I guess. So because these particular ones here are just for show, I need to make it look like they have access back into the police station through a hole in the wall here, and then maybe they connect onto the road that I've run into. So I grabbed the prop version of the pod vehicle and turn it to procedural objects, and initially I wanted to try and make it blue and red, our recognised universal police colours. And I'd normally use the text customization function with procedural objects to do this, but it really wasn't working. I couldn't get it to work here, so in the end I just made them all black and then wrote police on the side of it very simply with white. But I think that looks really cool in the end. Actually, it gives them more of an undercover sort of an FBI vibe, which I really like. So then the last thing I need to do to finish this area is just run a fake pod track through the door we put in earlier to make it look like they've got that access back in. And with that, the police station is pretty much done. Now we can flip around to the other side of the area we're working on, and over here on this raised sort of a walkway, I'm going to make it sort of a shopping or commercial area here. But not a hyper commercial area like we've built previously. This one's going to be sort of much more industrial. I want way more pipes and stuff around because this is bordering on the back of our industrial area. So in episode 1 we set this industrial area up to be our maintenance area for the city. So I really want to reflect that in the way this is built here on the edge of it. Most of the buildings here that I'm putting in are procedural objects because I'm turning them, or some of them, in pretty unique ways. This particular one here I chose because I wanted a really simple glass looking one here that I could turn sideways and butt right up to our pod station. So this is quite a nice elegant looking building, and we're going to offset that with some pretty rough dodgy looking ones up here on the top of this building, and I'm going to turn these 90 degrees or parallel with the ground with procedural objects and butt two versions of this building up to each other up the top here. This looks really cool and gives this area a very unique look. So in terms of detailing this area, I'm going to start with these shops on this raised walkway. I want to make it look like the facades around these shops are reflecting an actual shop in these buildings. So I'm adding some sci-fi props that might look like they're windows or things directly next to these shops. The next thing to do is put an appropriate flooring down. So I'm using another sci-fi based flooring and using procedural objects so that I can run this very quickly down the length here. And eventually I will turn the vanilla pathway into an invisible one. And after a few pipes and steam have been added, this area is looking really good. There's another thing that I'm pretty keen on seeing built in the city, and that is a hospital. And this is going to be probably as far from a normal hospital as you could possibly get. But much like our police station, it's going to have a full reliance, or very much a reliance, on air vehicles. And to build our hospital, I've chosen this area here, which is a pretty non-assuming part of our industry area. And I've chosen this because it's pretty much bang in the middle of at least what we've built up so far, but as the city progresses, this is still going to be in a pretty good spot for a hospital. It has direct access to pretty much everywhere in the city from here via our hidden roads. So the first thing I need to do is obviously either shuffle things out of the way or delete them so that we have room for the hospital. And the hospital's not just going to be one building, it's going to have different wards and sort of different areas to it. So once I've cleared a bit of an area, the first thing I want to do is remove the surface networks so that I can see the road underneath that's supplying the citizens or the traffic to the area. This is the road that I want to work off. I bring another road eventually up, probably about another 20 meters from this to run a part of the hospital, but most of it will run off this road that's hidden underneath the surface networks. So the hospital is going to be made up of cube services. I've got 5 in here that handle 100 patients each, which brings us to a 500 patient total, which should be right for about now, and these are all having their spawn points set back to the road underneath that we worked off. That means that all of the garbage that needs picking up and all of the services for the hospital can be picked up without seeing any of the vehicles. So the next thing to do is hook a path up, a pedestrian path from that road that runs around and services all of those hospital cube services, because what we'll find is the citizens will park up on the road if they need to come to the hospital, then walk up these paths to get into the hospital. So with that knowledge, we can make these paths go wherever we want and know that there's going to be a lot of people using them. Next, I found these blank modular helicopter landing pads on the Steam workshop, and these are perfect. I can put these down and then build whatever I want around them, knowing that a helicopter will land on them. So I find a good spot here to put the medical one down and make sure there's a pedestrian path from this area directly to the hospital. So as you can see, it all looks pretty bloody crude at the moment, and it doesn't have to look pretty because I know that I'm going to cover all of this. So I leave the game running like this for a beer's worth, and then I'll come back and check and make sure everything's running properly. And if it is, I can start putting our buildings in and covering all the bits that I don't want to see. Now, when it comes to building this hospital, I don't really see a big flash, amazing, cutting edge hospital. I see more of a dystopian type hospital that just gets the job done. Maybe as horribly sinister as it sounds, but the more patients they can get through the hospital, maybe the more medication that the Amiga group can sell. So if they have a very efficient hospital that works, I guess it doesn't really need to look flash. So the building I've chosen here is the same building I'll use for all these different wards, and I've chosen it because A, very sci-fi looking, and B, it's very dystopian looking, which suits our theme here pretty well. And you'll see here too that while I was down my little rabbit hole building the hospital, I realised I had built one of the wards directly in the path of the aero train, and it went sailing through it, which was hilarious. So I had to make it a little bit smaller. And while I was doing all of this, I realised that the planes and the flying vehicles were also landing at another spot. They were landing on some of the hospitals, which I thought was a little bit weird. So I tried to work with it and make it look like they were sort of entering into a void, and maybe they were dropping down to within the hospital through this void. But in the end, I changed this, so we'll go into that a little bit later on anyway. Next, we're going to finish off detailing around the front here where it looks really ugly. I want to put some retaining walls in around here and bring some surface networks out to meet them neatly to make it look like there's more of a usable area out here. Of course, this is where we're going to put our landing pad, and again, I'm working with the building that we put down originally to make those helicopters land. I will adjust the landing pad to suit so it looks the best that I can get it. So other things we're going to need out here are obviously going to be entrances directly from the landing pad inside for emergencies. So we put entrances out here. I put a couple of different ones. One goes up a ramp, runs on ground level, and I also put like a different building in with procedural objects to make the entrance look a bit more formalized. And eventually I'll add some prop paramedics and beds, little paramedic gear, down on the landing pad so it looks like they're ready for an emergency if it comes in, sort of thing. Then I want to do a couple of maybe special or different things out the front, like adding in little neon crosses just to make sure that you know it's a hospital, and then things like numbers by doors, so maybe the aircraft coming in know exactly where to land or where to go once they land. When I built the hospital, I left these strategic corridors where some of the people were walking between the wards and whatnot. This was because I really wanted to see animation in the area, and I didn't want to cover up where everyone was walking. So admittedly, some of these paths need tweaking because there's some people walking in the air and stuff, but eventually I get all of them where they need to go, and then we can also put doors and stuff where they enter some of these wards or buildings. So some of these different buildings may be maternity wards or clinics, or maybe they're emergency departments, things like that. So I'm also putting signs up so that people know exactly where to go to get to which part of the hospital. So I guess going with the dystopian theme that we're going with so far with the hospital, these entrances to these buildings are going to be pretty no frills. They're going to be more or less just a door and a sign saying exactly where it is you're entering. You might notice too that I've turned some of the paths to invisible ones, but eventually obviously I'll turn all of them to invisible. So it just looks like they're walking down a corridor here. And it really is quite amazing how many people are using these pathways already. Like, it literally is just the hospital and, I don't know, maybe like a cemetery cube service down there or something, but there's just hundreds of people streaming down here for whatever reason, but it looks really cool. So we're coming towards the end of the hospital build now, and I want to add in final touches like this, which is just the name of the hospital next to the path as the citizens walk towards it. For now I'm just going to call it KP Hospital, but maybe in the comments if you guys have got a better suggestion for a name, please chuck it in there, and the best suggestion I will rename the hospital. So now I want to revisit earlier where we made the void where the planes were landing and change this into a landing pad. I was never really that happy with the way that they came into that void that I made, so what I want to do here is make this look like it's an emergency landing. I do have to move a couple of things out of the way here, namely the pod track, and there is a fair amount of clipping, but I can live with that because this looks really good, and I think it looks much better than that void that we had earlier. So you may have noticed too that I put a red ring or holographic ring around the outside that looks like it's blinking up and down. And the way that I did that was I used a holographic procedural objects shape and then added one of the holographic shapes as a texture that I had downloaded. Then I used the text customization function to add a red sticker at the max by max size. This makes it completely red, and then I can manipulate the shape of it to fit the landing pad. And finally, to make it look like it's blinking, I use the modules function to make it go up and down about 3 feet, so that the lowest point is below the landing pad and the highest point is just above it. Then I can add these to an export, and every time I come back into the save I just need to import that export and they come back with one click of the button. So anyway guys, that brings us to the end of the episode. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I'm coming back with my other episodes on my other series very shortly. I'm working on something special, so I hope in the meantime you've enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. See you later.